Well, hello everybody. Thanks for tuning in. This is a new year, new formats. We are native Russian speakers, but we decided to speak English. Well, I would like to introduce my good friend Anton Bogrash. Hi, Anton.
Hi, Alice.
So,
Great to hear from you.
yes, good to hear from you. We are almost classmates from the Lomonosov Moscow State University. We studied at the same department. It's called Faculty of Geology, right? And then it has different departments, cathedrals.
Yes, it's a bit different system from the Western universities where you would have where faculty comprises. It's typically something much larger than what we have. It's kind of a school. They may call it like School of Earth Sciences or something like that.
Yeah,
Which
exactly.
is something that Lomonosov MSU is actually replicating these days, as far as I'm aware, where they've tried to combine geology, geography, and some other faculties into one. But yeah, we were both at the Faculty of Geology, but parts of different departments. So I was studying engineering geology, engineering and environmental geology, to be precise, as my
Right.
BSc.
Right. And I was into earthquakes and later into volcanoes and stuff like that. Great. But nowadays we are pursuing different careers, at least for the moment. I'm working for industry, and Anton is a student. You better talk us through yourself, Anton.
Right. I did mention my bachelor degree already in engineering and environmental geology. I never really had to practice that. I went to
You were in
MS.
Sochi for the Olympic
Yeah,
thing.
you're right. It was an industry placement, so to speak. Yes, you're right. That was a couple of months of actually doing engineering surveys prior to the Sochi Olympic Games in Russia in 2014, whereas the actual work that we did was in 2009. Yeah, even before these objects were built. Correct. My master degree was also at Lomonosov Moscow State University. It was a short-lived joint degree from Petroleum Geology department and geophysics. So I typically tend to translate it as petroleum geology with main focus, so petroleum geoscience with main focus on geophysics. And my thesis was on geophysical side of things, like reservoir characterization with using inversion, seismic inversion. Then I went to work for PGS, Petroleum Geo-Services. That's marine geophysical company from Norway, operating globally. And back then they had their office in Moscow. And I started in PGS Reservoir, which is structural interpretation, essentially. So I did a bit of that, and after a bit less than a year, actually, PGS decided to close their Moscow branch. But I was fortunate enough to keep my position, not full position, but I was allowed to finish my degree because the company was providing me with materials, software and the data, and also the workstation. So I was lucky to finish my degree. And then there was a funny story, actually. I remember that Global HR, PGS, sent me an email that they don't have any positions for me. There's no openings. Like, we're sorry, thank you for your interest, and we're sorry, all that stuff. The reality was a bit different because I was contacting various people at PGS with regards to my work after the graduation, and I was lucky enough to get a position as a offshore processor. I didn't really want to work in the office back then, and I wanted to travel, and marine seismic to me was like, well, isn't that great start, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get to travel, it's fun, and you see how the data is actually acquired. You see how things start and all that complicated and I would even call convoluted seismic story, as anyone in geophysics would know. Convolution is kind of big part of it. So I did travel a lot. So it was really good fun. I worked on like 5 continents. Initially I planned it's going to be like 2-3 years, and honestly, virtually anyone coming into seismic thinks that I'm just going to do this for 2-3 years and then I'll get something else. So some people stay there for life. I was, I guess, lucky enough to stay there only for 6.5 years, or 7 years. I did it for 7 years. And I was also fortunate to have occasional office assignments instead of going offshore all the time. So specifically, I was going to Weybridge, Surrey, suburb of London, English countryside. Yeah, it's a lovely place. So I was there, and at some point I actually thought, since I had to work there, and I have the right visa, I thought, well, I can actually live there, right? So I decided to go to London to live there because it didn't really matter where I live. And it was almost 3 years in the UK. Well, it's kind of in the UK. I would say I was sort of based in the UK. I was traveling like crazy, so it was hard to tell where I lived, to be honest, all these years. The place I spent my time the most was actually the seismic vessel. So you could say, for anyone working in offshore seismic, they know what their real home is, so to speak. But at the same time, I was thinking, okay, offshore is good, but only for some time. There is a limited, how should I say, if you want to grow technically, it's not quite the place where you would grow technically as a geophysicist. So I thought, well, I need to think about my research project. I was still fascinated about research, and I've learned about geostatistics, and I was thinking about basically combining some geostatistics, geophysics, and geology for reservoir characterization. We're speaking about petroleum exploration, so I was in that domain. And I started gathering various materials, started thinking about how do I actually do it. I did consider doing it started doing it at Lomonosov, Moscow State University. But then I realized, well, I probably want to go for more international experience, more sort of global outreach, so to speak. So I started contacting geostatistics experts around the world and basically asking them, well, I want to do research in sort of jointly in geostatistics and geophysics. What do you think? And I started about applying for a PhD.
Eventually made you turn the page, like start a new chapter of your life and to do something different.
Yeah, I would call it like a passionate decision. I was thinking that I would want to go for research.
Mm-hmm.
The areas I mentioned previously, geostatistics, geophysics, geology, let's rank it that way, although I would not kind of put geostatistics over geophysics or vice versa. It doesn't really matter. And I thought, well, yes, on one hand, you can do research and development work in a company, and on the other hand, you could do that in academia. So I thought, since I didn't have a PhD degree, which is not really a strict prerequisite to obtaining a position in R&D department in a major energy company, but let's say your chances are much higher.
Okay.
And and I thought, why not? I want to try it. I just want to try it, and why not? So I've been playing a lot since I have a family to support. It's my wife and son. So I couldn't do just any careless move, just leave my position and just go wherever I want. Of course, I've been preparing myself financially, administratively, and you see what I mean. So I did contact a few universities, less than 10 in total, more than 5. And I did submit formal applications to 4 of them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I accepted only to one, that is University of Alberta in Canada, in Edmonton. Great university, great research group. And I was not disappointed at all. It's fascinating people to work with. Some of our listeners who may be interested or familiar with sequence photography would recognize the name of Octavian Cataniano, who's author of the Principles of Sequence Photography. So I took his course, and it was absolutely amazing. In geostatistics, it's Clayton Deutsch's group, who, again, one of the most prominent geostatisticians of all times, and insanely smart person. He's a genius, honestly. You just grow by basically standing next to him, I would say. So it was a great experience. Top scientists to work with, great teachers, and also a lot of bright young minds. And I think it's also important to understand that sometimes it's not just the content that you're learning. It's not just the training itself. It's not just the way of thinking. It's also how it could be thought. And it's a different paradigm from Russia, a very different one.
Okay, but I would imagine this decision of yours came at some cost, right? As anything in life, you have to sacrifice something to win over something
Absolutely.
else.
Absolutely. It's financial security. Of course, graduate student in North America, if on a basic scholarship, let's say, I'm fortunate I'm fortunate to be sponsored, because there are people who actually have to pay for their tuition fees, especially in North America, especially in the US. Not the fees are not as exuberant in Canada, but nevertheless. So, of course, after working in industry, it's a significant pay cut that I had to experience. And it's not just me, it's my family as well. But again, I had some savings, and so far so good. So far so good. I virtually changed everything in my life except my family, to be honest. So that's the only aspect of my life that remained unchanged. And let's say Edmonton turned out to be a place that is not quite my cup of tea, but it's still an interesting experience. And I should mention that, I started a little bit more than like a year and semester ago, and that was September 2019. And one of the surprising components of my degree was amount of studying, because I naively thought that I go there as a researcher, but it was more or less full-time studying. And full-time, I mean, not like 40 hours a week, but something like closer to 80 hours a week. So you barely sleep, and it's not something I was really mentally prepared for. I admit it. It was really hard. And this was also level of the mathematics and statistics and programming, numerical methods. That was, let's face it, it was just way above my prime back when I was a student at Lomonosov MSU. So it was really challenging, but it was great. Yeah, of course, a very steep learning curve. Gradually, the balance shifted towards research. So it was less courses, more research. And it's great. It's great to work on your own project. That is something that a feeling of deep satisfaction that I actually made this decision is nevertheless with me.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it comes at a certain cost. And overall, I don't regret anything. I think it's better to regret about doing something than regret about not doing it at all. Yeah. So
I wonder if you've seen the movie Yes Man with Jim Carrey. Basically, his character decided someday that he would say yes to anything that comes into his life. Any opportunity, he would go yes, of course. It's quite a nice one if you think about it from philosophical point of view. It's
I may have watched it, and it is indeed a very philosophical. How should I say? Yeah, there is a philosophy defining that attitude, right? Whether you're a yes man or you're a no man, or there's something in between. You consider your interests first, or you do the priorities. It's indeed a philosophical position, how to go about your life. So after spending almost a year in Canada, we had an opportunity to go back to Russia with my family, because we just realized, everyone has to sit through this lockdown anyways. It was not a strict lockdown, I must say. I was, again, lucky not to experience any strict lockdown in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, we were not allowed to visit the university, so there was no reason to be in the country, because you're not really allowed to go to the office. So we decided we would continue working remotely, because, again, it's a bit easier with family, with your support network back home. So since August 2020, we came back to Moscow, and we're still there. And it's still okay to be remote, because the rules and requirements became only harsher because of the new wave of COVID. They actually made the restriction in Alberta harsher comparing to what we had to face when we were there. So we're still in Moscow, and probably gonna get back somewhere in summer, maybe autumn, or we'll see how the events unfold, because nobody really knows what's gonna happen, right?
Yeah, but I just want to repeat to our listeners about your status. I think it's really cool and unique that you're a Canadian student residing in Moscow, Russia. It's quite unique, and just shows how we have to be innovative in this new environment with COVID, and that defines new rules, and yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I think it's another part of globalizing world, right? It's just how it works now. And yeah, there's more and more students who decide to stay at home or elsewhere, not in the pricey locations where their universities are. So yeah, that's let's see how the mass vaccination would affect the whole situation. But yeah, when I think about moving forward, I was actually accepted into master degree rather than PhD because pretty much anyone in my department gets accepted into masters first, and then if they are, I would say, strong enough and brave enough, they either switch to PhD or they finish their masters first and go for PhD, or just finish their masters and go for work.
Yeah, I just thought about it for a second, and it's actually a norm in the Western world. It's called a graduate school, right? And then you enroll to a graduate school, and then you have exactly the choice doing the masters and then quitting, or continuing to and pursue the PhD degree. So it's a norm, and it's different from the Russian system.
It's very different from Russian system indeed, and I think it's pretty different from European system too. It's
yeah, you're right.
Particularly North American way of doing things, of getting degrees, and yeah, it typically works like that.
So what are your plans then?
Yes, so I initially didn't even consider second master degree, but now the more I think about it in terms of my further career, I was perhaps somewhat surprised to find out that how much of a change in my mindset I went through over the years I worked at PGS. I always considered myself, and to some degree was considered as some sort of more of a kind of a guy from academia, not like a guy from academia, but let's say more of a researcher type persona among my colleagues at PGS. And it's a bit surprising to find out that I perhaps turned into some more pragmatic person. And I still think about going to research and development, to energy companies, but I think I've expanded my, say, pool of potential career paths. I was primarily seeing myself as a researcher and was thinking, okay, I will do it either in academia or in industry, but now I think more about just being like a technical advisor, or even going to sales and marketing and things like that.
Okay.
I started thinking more about sort of diversifying my skill set, and perhaps I'm more or less 100% sure I don't want to go through these postdoc madness. So in the Western world, typically there is an interesting shift, especially in the US. So what was happening, you have so-called tenure track position. That means that you have a secure employment and the job is yours. You teach, you do research as a professor, and things work well. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think half a century ago it was something like 3/4 of staff were permanent staff of the universities. But then
those days long gone.
Yes, exactly. And especially the US being the sort of capitalist driver, main capitalist driver of this world, and its academia being some of the strongest scientific workforce in the world, rules of the game have changed significantly, and the administrators of the universities basically were thinking, hey, we're having all these budget cuts. How can we save costs? The solution was the following. You can hire adjunct professors and also push some of the teaching and assistant work towards graduate students who are paid significantly less than the professors, the permanent researchers and teachers. And yes, basically now I think it's about 1/4 of the staff of the faculty that are on permanent positions, and mostly it's adjuncts and postdocs and graduate students who carry out majority of research. There is no doubt about it, and a significant part of teaching too. And coming back to my decisions, it's just unfortunately the economics of this story is that adjunct professors and postdocs are most of the times are underpaid. And in the US, quite a lot of them cannot actually afford the health insurance, which is a specific American, US problem, not an issue in Canada where they have universal health care. But nevertheless, overall conditions, even in Europe, and even in Northern Europe, I would say they're not so great. So this is something I would like to avoid through working in industry, and basically potentially maybe coming back as some assistant professor later on in my 40s when I have substantial industry experience that would be deemed relevant for teaching too. But it's not just that, it's also, and I would say mostly, is that I think I to some extent miss the drive of working in a company. It's a different set of rules, but I think I was just personally surprised that I would be missing it so much. But maybe I miss it so much because, we all miss, the memories become distorted and we start romanticizing our past, and maybe that's what happened to me. I would not deny that, the possibility of a certain mental twist. But it's an interesting journey, regardless whether it's going to be a PhD as I initially planned or if it's just a second master. And I must say, as opposed to Russia, I would say bachelor degree in Russia is still strong, at least at MSU and other universities too. But I must admit that our graduate or postgraduate education, namely master degrees and PhD, which is equivalent of aspirantura, it's different level altogether. I think in Russia, we just borrowed that system, I wouldn't say blindly, but let's say too quickly without changing the mentality and the purpose of what is going on. So while my degree at Lomonosov Moscow State University and my master degree was great, because I switched department, I had to learn so much in petroleum geology and in geophysics. It was very intense for me, but I think it was a bit less intense for petroleum geologists and geophysicists, because for them it was just a set of a bit more courses, not really structured very well or working towards one specific goal. And the dissertation for most students was not that intense of an experience. It was just totally different from Canada, and as I understand, from the whole of North America, where people work so hard, it's just insane. I don't know any single person who's not working on weekends. I mean, 0 people from more than 100 that I know. Every single person there would work on a weekend.
That's tough.
Occasion. I would say perhaps some of them have occasional weekends that without work, but people overwork insanely. And that's another cost of doing it. And I initially thought, well, okay, you have industry, you're paid better, you're stressed more. So then you may choose academia, okay, because, they pay less, but you have a lot of freedom in what you do, and it's less stress. Now, that's not quite what I see, at least. Again, maybe in Europe it's a bit different, but what I see in North America, I wouldn't call it less stressed by any means, no. It's very stressful. The process of actually getting into those programs is pretty tricky. So I was applying to few universities, so 4 formal applications and one that I was close to formal application but decided not to do it so I could focus on another application. I can say that I can name the countries that I considered. That is the UK, Switzerland, Denmark, Canada, and the US. And all of these places, specifically like universities or provinces or canton in Switzerland or state in the US, like they have, and the actual institutions themselves, they have very different rules and very different zones of obvious, I would say. So some things that they consider as obvious, which someone on another continent would not consider obvious at all. So this is another interesting part, I would say, of the application process, which is very laborious and requires a lot of effort, really, and careful planning. So say in Switzerland, there was a lot of emphasis on your research proposal. In Canada, there was no requirement for research proposal at all. In the US as well. In the UK, it was kind of in between. You had to provide them with proposal, but you couldn't. It was not as important as in Switzerland, for example. So it was again very interesting to learn why, and not like I didn't really learn why it's like that, but it's interesting to learn how different places focus on different things. Definitely.
To wrap up, Anton,
Yes.
what would you recommend or say to our young listeners who are, let's say, like finishing their third or fourth year of the bachelor program? Then the whole world is open for them.
Absolutely.
And they listen to our podcast and hear amazing stories about your industry experience, like 6, 7, 8 years offshore in such amazing places, and then completely different path you took pursuing a degree in academia. So you can do anything in this world, more or less.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I think the world is open to anyone, more or less. Some have, more advantage or a bit less advantage, but nevertheless, I think with this online, in the new online world, more places became more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that I decided to challenge myself with extreme maths and coding. Well, extreme to me, at least, yeah. But again, that is for everyone. It's individual sort of pace. What you decide is beyond your zone of comfort. So definitely, if you want to be great at what you do, you should step out of your comfort zone, right? So if things come really easy,
Mm-hmm.
you perhaps should try something, either an adjacent field or going deeper in the field you're already in. So it becomes really hard, but not too hard, so you could still at least function as a human being, right? So like work-life balance is especially tricky with while you sit at home, like most of us have to stay at home. I would say coding is something that I see as a good skill set for virtually anyone, even if you want to be like, if you're super ambitious, want to become like an executive in some corporation or start your own business. I guess if you are to present at do a lot of public speaking, and you can back your claims with some data, and you can also demonstrate that it's actually you yourself who prepared and gathered that data, visualized and made some conclusions. I think that's not only impressive, that actually it is useful, because it really becomes important to do a lot of fact check, because the amount of information is increasing, right? So working with that is important, and coding is part of that story, I think. Visualizing and looking at the right places, right? And then processing all that crazy amount of information, verifying or like validating or falsifying certain claims, right? That's another important thing. Another piece of advice would be to try to stay global, reach out to other cultures, so you could learn a lot, because you challenge the way you think. You see how things could be done totally different from what you're used to or sort of taught. It's really great, and yes, someone was telling you it's a great thing. Then you may have your own take on was it so great or not, and then you learn from not just learn, you see how someone else in the other part of the world doing it.
Yeah.
So another thing is, since plenty of our listeners would have to do something with earth sciences, right?
Yeah.
Is that petroleum
geography. And
absolutely. So petroleum industry is not doing very well, and it's still gonna be perhaps good for a few more decades, but it should be important to keep in mind that, for example, in Europe, in New Zealand and Australia, there are laws that are aimed at sustainable future, right? Where burning hydrocarbons and fossil fuels, it's not part of that future. So their governments, so for example, Denmark decided to close all the petroleum exploration and production by 2050, if I recall. Something similar is happening in New Zealand, and the trend is pretty clear that industrialized Western nations are going towards zero net carbon future. So perhaps petroleum industry, which is these days, major companies tend to call themselves energy companies, right? Because they think about alternative sources of energy. This is something to keep in mind, that petroleum is not as lucrative as it was, like even 10 years ago. So it's good to keep in mind that. On the other hand, areas like hydrogeology, I would say water, construction, engineering geology, that would be in demand, I think. Environmental geology, indeed. Mining is probably going to be doing much better. I mean,
with the introduction of all this remote technologies like
Absolutely.
man-free.
Yes, it's just more costs and more complications for the companies, but they are doing well. They're doing well these days through 2020, and most of the resources like gold, diamonds, precious metals, rare earths, right? That's what I mean. There is no reason to think that it's going to be significantly worse in decades to come, although, again, similar environmental concerns. But again, mining would be perhaps doing not as bad, although it's all the mining combined is something like 1/3 of the petroleum industry. But nevertheless, although I think like Russia and Middle East are still okay for petroleum industry career to pursue because we have cheap oil, and Middle East has even cheaper oil, so that is something to keep in mind. And also gas. It's an interesting part, I think, term in the whole equation that, okay, say, let's say oil becomes obsolete or undesirable for environmental reasons. I think we're gonna see a few more centuries of gas with us because it's clean to burn gas, natural gas. So I think that is also important. And I think that's how petroleum industry may survive. I mean, the fossil fuel part. So this is what I would say in terms of outlook. And perhaps another way that I wanted to talk about, I have also a volunteer commitment at Society of Exploration Geophysicist.
Okay.
And something I would encourage, any earth science professional to visit s3e1.org and see if there's anything that they might find useful in terms of events, workshops, networking opportunities, research projects, etc. There is many things happening. And again, it's although it's heavily skewed towards North America, it's still a global society. It's also the main one in Asia. It's stronger than EG in Asia Pacific in general. So this is something to consider. And there is a lot of emphasis on so-called social geoscience, where there are humanitarian efforts. So it's preventing the hazards, like geological hazards, right? Earthquakes, tsunamis, or, for example, it's water exploration for impoverished areas, for example, in Africa, or not only impoverished, it could be very well developed areas like, US, Spain, or Australia, for example. But there is a lot of social aspect in geoscience, and I think that is another trend that is going to be only stronger, with plenty of governmental support and NGO, not government, non-profit organizations. So this is something I would also look for in terms of they may have grants, or they may have, they can cover costs in participating in those projects. And I think it's great on every possible level you can think of. It's good for you as a geologist. It's great for you as a professional in terms of connections, and it's also great as a human being, so you can help someone else in dire need. So I think it's also some of the brilliant opportunities that young students could look for.
Thanks very much for sharing your ideas. So we talked about the industry is going green, right? The industry is going smarter and becoming more responsible for the society. We talked about these aspects, I think. You mentioned those. What about pure research in earth science? You are actually the first geophysicist in my show, so I really would love to hear. So in terms of pure research, what do you see for geophysics in the new decade? Like,
right.
What is really cool in your area?
Right. It's not the area I'm pursuing. So I'm heavily in numerical methods like computational geostatistics. I'm trying to blend, geostatistics, geophysics, and geology, all these bunch of people who sometimes don't enjoy, how should I say, invade each other bubbles. So this is where I challenge myself too. I would say that what I've heard from and what I read from some of the articles recently is geochemistry integrated with geophysics. So entirely. So I have no standing in. I never did real geochemistry. I mean, I had a couple of courses. That's about it back in Moscow. But as from what I've heard, that's one thing. Another thing in geophysics, since geophysics was always math heavy, so plenty of these buzzwords like artificial intelligence, neural networks, etc., plenty of solutions that were not previously computationally feasible become computationally feasible. So plenty of work there.
Right.
And then if we think about global geodynamics, again, not my area of expertise. However, as far as I understand, there's many, many questions in terms of rheology and overall mechanics of the plates or tectonophysics that there are kind of enigmatic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that is another direction that is really has, pretty bright future. It has bright past, present, and I don't think it's going to be dimmer in decades to come. That would be the main, I would say.
Thank you.
Yeah, smart, sort of this smart digitalized world, right? That's also contribution to smart cities. So I've seen some workshops on smart cities where various urban experts on urbanism draw upon geophysical expertise, in fact, to measure certain things, or it could be hydrogeology, again, tracking pollutants, contaminants, and things like that. It becomes easier to collect that data, and there's a lot of developments in that area, I would say, environmental.
Great. I'm just concerned that the geology as a discipline, as a profession, might be a bit out of fashion these days. But I don't know, you talked us through such amazing applications and areas for research. I think the young students should not be disappointed that they have chosen that discipline for study. So what do you say? Shall we encourage to stay at least in earth science?
Yes, overall, yes. I think earth science is a unique set of expertise. And another thing that I was thinking is partly philosophical, is that it's a totally different take on time. Yeah. So there are climate challenges, and I was recently going through some articles, on climate change, tracking the temperature, and I see at best, they show a couple of centuries, and you can see a clear trend. The temperature is rising, right? But as geologists, 200 years, like, come on, you're looking to millions and tens of millions of years, right? This is the trend. This is the scale we work in. And apparently quite a lot of specialists, really good scientists, don't seem to grasp that. And it's not an easy one, right? We're trained for a few years just to become acquainted and work in those tremendous, by human standards, right? Tremendous lengths of time intervals. And I think that is fascinating, and that is a mindset that is changing and is forcing us to think things through in really, really wide perspective from time. So I think that is very useful quality of any geologist, is to see historical perspective, which would be useful, in politics and finance. Again, I don't want to go to some more of a pragmatic applications now, but I think while being fascinating on its own, I think it's also useful in other areas. And again, I think basic research is not doing well. It's not doing as great as it was perhaps in the middle of 20th century, but it's still funded. There is plenty of agencies and more or less any developed industrialized nation and also emerging powers like, say, India and China, they do spend plenty of resources on basic research, which is pure, which is not really asking for any specific result. Yeah, it's just research.
Yeah, fundamental science. Mm-hmm.
Fundamental science, yes, basic research. So I think that is still doing reasonably well. So if you're not, you are up for pure research in geology, there is still plenty of room. Again, there is plenty of technological advancements in terms of what you can measure, like in terms of chemical composition, right? In terms of, this is where I go into, it's like, say, crystallography, right? There are more like tools and mineralogy to investigate.
Yeah. So I'm working for a company that produces those tools that help scientists to acquire new data on new levels. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think? Would you sort of kind of falsify or validate the claim that it's that the technology, the equipment we work with, opens some new possibilities?
Of course, I can just validate.
Okay, that's good. Yes, so that's one thing, right? But then if you are more into global, like geodynamic scale or the tectonic, it's still so much to think about there, right? You would perhaps need to use some perhaps remote sensing or some geophysics to study that, but combine it with other methods. And again, geochemistry and geophysics. And it seems like there is very few sort of pure disciplines left, right? Unless either you become a specialist on something totally new and that's new area, or you have to work across so many disciplines to get something done these days, right? It's just the research
challenging for the young generation, for the I guess.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Thank you so much, Anton, for talking to me today and sharing your experience and ideas. It was very fun. Thanks.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Thank you, Les, for giving me this opportunity and for the very interesting conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Me too. Good luck on your journey. Bye.
Thank you very much. Yeah, bye.